Most people think Jack and the Beanstalk is nothing more than a light-hearted children's story. Yet researchers have traced its narrative roots back thousands of years, long before the earliest known written versions. It may be one of the oldest surviving tales in the Indo-European world, older than many recorded myths, and older than the languages most of us speak today. And within its familiar plot lies a puzzle. Why does a simple farm boy climb a towering plant into the sky to confront a giant who lives above the clouds? When we hear the story of Jack trading a cow for a handful of beans, it feels like a simple folktale meant for children. But the roots of this story reach back much further than most people imagine. To understand where it truly comes from, we have to step into the long history of oral storytelling, where tales were carried from one generation to the next, long before they were written down. The earliest known version that resembles the modern story appears in England in the early 18th century, but even that version was already a retelling of something older. Folklorists believe that the core narrative existed in oral form for centuries, shaped and reshaped as it traveled through villages, markets, and family gatherings. During this time, stories lived in the voices of the people who repeated them. Each storyteller added details, removed others, or changed the tone to fit the moral lessons valued by their community. As the story moved through time, it shifted along with the societies that carried it. Medieval audiences were drawn to tales of trickster heroes who could outsmart powerful enemies because such characters offered a sense of hope and relief in a world where daily life was controlled by harsh rulers, limited opportunities, and strict social hierarchies. A poor boy defeating a giant would have been more than entertainment. It represented the dream of overturning an unfair system. By the 16th and 17th centuries, England was undergoing major changes. Trade was expanding, cities were growing, and a new class of wealthy elites was rising. Old feudal structures were weakening, creating both excitement and anxiety. People were fascinated by stories that questioned power, especially those that involved ordinary individuals confronting figures who seemed larger than life. This social environment helped keep the tale alive. It gave the story meaning that connected deeply with the people hearing it. When the first printed versions finally appeared, they captured only one form of the tale. Printed books acted like snapshots, freezing a story that had once shifted freely with each telling. But even though the versions we read today feel stable, they are really the end result of a narrative that had been evolving for centuries. One important printed version came from the early 19th century during the Victorian period. This era placed strong emphasis on moral behavior, respectability, and social order. Because of that, the story was edited to reinforce the values of the time. For example, early oral versions often portrayed Jack as a clever but somewhat reckless figure, someone who took risks and sometimes acted without permission. But Victorian writers did not like heroes who broke rules. They wanted stories to teach obedience and virtue. So Jack was rewritten to look more responsible. In some adaptations, the giant became the clear villain because he had stolen from Jack's father. The treasure Jack steals is described as rightfully his. This shift changed the moral frame of the story. Instead of focusing on a boy who tricks a giant and gets lucky, the tale became a lesson about reclaiming one's lost inheritance. Victorian readers preferred this version because it fit neatly with their ideas of justice, property, and good behavior. But even these printed versions represent only a small part of the story's history. Modern researchers have looked much deeper. In recent years, some linguists and folklorists have used statistical methods to study how stories spread over time. When they applied these techniques to European folktales, they found something surprising. The story type that includes Jack and the Beanstalk appears to be incredibly ancient, possibly more than 5,000 years old. If this estimate is correct, then the core ideas behind the tale existed long before written language and long before the cultures we associate with the story even formed. This discovery raises a fascinating possibility. The tale may have begun as part of a shared storytelling tradition among early Indo-European peoples, long before their descendants spread across Europe and parts of Asia. These early communities had their own myths, beliefs, and explanations for how the world worked. Many of those ideas have been lost, but some may have survived in stories like this one. When scholars compare Jack's story to myths from distant cultures, they notice patterns. Tales about climbing something tall to reach the sky appear in many ancient traditions. In Norse mythology, there is a great tree that connects different worlds. In some Siberian and Central Asian myths, shamans climb a sacred pole or tree to reach the realm of spirits. In Hindu tradition, there are stories of cosmic mountains or towering trees that link earth and heaven. These similarities do not prove that all these cultures shared one story, but they do show that the image of climbing upward into another realm is very old and very widespread. The presence of giants also fits into ancient storytelling traditions. In many early mythologies, giants are not simply large people. They represent forces of nature, powerful ancestors, or older beings who lived before the gods of later religions. Sometimes they are wise, sometimes destructive, but they almost always stand for something greater than human strength. When such figures appear in stories, they are usually connected to themes of power, chaos, or the boundaries between worlds. If we combine these elements, a climb to the sky, a giant above the clouds, and a young hero who dares to cross into that forbidden realm, it becomes clear that Jack's story is more than a simple fairy tale. It may carry traces of mythic ideas that go back to a time when people saw the world as layered and vertical, with different realms stacked on top of one another. During the Bronze Age, as early societies began forming more complex religious systems, stories about cosmic trees or sky bridges would have helped people explain their environment. The sky was mysterious and unreachable. Storms, sunlight, and seasonal changes came from above, leading many cultures to imagine unseen beings living in that elevated space. The idea of climbing upward to meet them would have been both thrilling and dangerous. Over time, as these early myths traveled and transformed, they gradually became less sacred and more entertaining. What once may have been a story about shamans, gods, or cosmic forces slowly turned into an adventure tale told around village fires. The original religious meaning softened, but the structure remained: an ascent, a powerful being, and a valuable treasure. Centuries later, as societies changed and new governments, religions, and economies emerged, the old mythic elements continued to echo in stories, even if their original meanings were forgotten. Oral storytellers kept the most exciting parts, the climb, the giant, the danger, and dropped the complex religious explanations that no longer matched the world around them. This natural editing process is common in folk tales. What survives tends to be whatever captures imagination. In England, the tale may have merged with local stories about giants, which were extremely common in medieval folklore. Many hills, stones, and ancient monuments in the English countryside were traditionally said to have been built or thrown by giants. These legends helped communities explain mysterious structures left behind by earlier civilizations. When the Beanstalk story entered this environment, it blended easily with existing folklore about giant beings living in remote or elevated places. By the time the story was firmly rooted in English tradition, it had become a mix of ancient mythic patterns, medieval folk beliefs, and later moral lessons. Each layer added new meaning. Some versions focused on bravery, others on cleverness, and still others on the importance of trusting magical helpers. The tale's ability to adapt may be the reason it survived for so long. When printed books became common in the 18th and 19th centuries, the tale finally became fixed in written form. But oral storytellers continued to tell their own versions, allowing the story to keep evolving even as the printed version spread across the world. This is why so many variations exist today. Some children's books show Jack as kind and gentle, while older versions show him as bold and cunning. Some versions portray the giant as monstrous, while others suggest he is simply guarding his home. The story adjusts to whatever message a culture wants to send. To understand the deeper conflict at the heart of the story, we need to look closely at the events that unfold once Jack receives the mysterious beans. This is the moment when an ordinary life suddenly shifts into something strange, risky, and symbolic. Up until that point, Jack is simply a poor boy living with his mother, struggling to survive. Their world is limited, predictable, and defined by scarcity. But the trade that Jack makes sets everything into motion. It is the catalyst for the entire adventure, and it marks the boundary between the everyday world and the unknown realm that waits above. When Jack brings home the beans, his mother reacts with anger and despair. From a realistic point of view, her reaction makes sense. She believes Jack has thrown away their last source of income. But within the logic of the story, this moment serves a bigger purpose. Jack's choice breaks the rules of ordinary life. He steps outside the expected path and accepts something that seems worthless but contains hidden potential. His mother's frustration highlights the idea that the adult world does not always recognize opportunity when it comes in strange forms. The tension between practical sense and intuitive risk becomes one of the central conflicts. The next morning, when Jack discovers the immense beanstalk reaching into the sky, the world of the story changes completely. This is the moment of transition. The beanstalk is not just a magical plant. It is a bridge into another realm, a space that obeys different rules and holds different dangers. Jack's decision to climb it represents curiosity overpowering fear. Most folk tales use a journey like this to mark the shift from youth to early adulthood. The climb is long, difficult, and filled with uncertainty. Once Jack reaches the top, he cannot return unchanged. When Jack enters the giant's world, the stakes increase sharply. This upper realm is full of wealth, magic, and danger. The giant's home is described as enormous, filled with objects that dwarf anything Jack has ever seen. Food is larger, furniture is larger, and even the sounds in the air seem amplified. Everything emphasizes Jack's vulnerability. The giant is not just physically large. He carries the authority of a powerful figure who dominates the space. His booming voice, often introduced with the famous line about smelling an intruder, signals that Jack's life could end at any moment. This introduces the central conflict, a small, clever outsider entering the domain of a huge, dangerous figure who represents control and dominance. Jack cannot fight the giant by strength. His only advantages are his quick thinking and his willingness to take risks. In the giant's world, those traits become crucial survival tools. Jack's encounters with the giant follow a repeating pattern. He climbs the beanstalk, sneaks into the giant's house, hides from danger, and escapes with something valuable. Each visit reveals a new piece of the story, and each escape raises the stakes. The first time, Jack steals gold. The second time, he takes a magical hen that lays golden eggs. The third time, he steals a harp that sings by itself. With every object Jack takes, the conflict escalates. The danger grows stronger, and the giant becomes more determined to catch the intruder. The use of repetition with escalation is common in very old stories. It helps build tension and makes the final moment feel earned. Each encounter pushes Jack further beyond his previous limits. He becomes bolder, more confident, and more aware of what is possible. At the same time, the giant becomes angrier, turning from mild suspicion into active pursuit. This creates a cycle where the conflict tightens until it reaches its breaking point. What makes this development especially interesting is that the objects Jack steals are not random treasures. The gold keeps him alive. The hen provides an endless source of wealth, and the harp produces music, a symbol often associated with divine or supernatural power. When Jack takes these items, he is not simply stealing riches. He is taking symbols of prosperity, creativity, and status. In many older myths, only gods or giants possess objects like these. By bringing them down to the human world, Jack upsets a natural boundary. In earlier versions of the story, this act is morally unclear and sometimes even questionable. But later retellings reshape the conflict, so Jack appears justified. The story reaches its most dramatic point when the giant finally chases Jack down the beanstalk. This moment shifts the conflict from a private struggle inside the giant's home to a life-or-death chase that spans the boundary between worlds. The beanstalk, once a symbol of possibility, becomes a dangerous escape route. Jack's descent is frantic, driven by fear rather than curiosity. For the first time, his choices put not only himself, but his entire home at risk. If the giant reaches the ground, he could destroy everything. When Jack reaches the bottom and cuts the beanstalk, the story hits its turning point. The giant falls and dies, ending the conflict in a single decisive action. This moment carries enormous symbolic weight. Jack destroys the connection between the human world and the giant's realm. The bridge between earth and sky collapses. Whatever knowledge, power, or danger existed above is now cut off forever. This is more than a simple ending to an adventure. It signals a major shift. Jack has returned from the strange realm with wealth and power, but he has also eliminated the path that allowed the exchange between worlds. In mythological patterns, this often represents the moment when ancient ways end and new ways begin. The collapse of the beanstalk can be interpreted as the closing of a door between a supernatural past and a more ordinary future. With the giant gone and the path destroyed, Jack's world undergoes a transformation. He and his mother now have wealth and security, but the extraordinary journey is over. The adventure that pushed Jack to grow and adapt is finished. In many versions, Jack uses his new fortune to improve his family's life, showing that the experiences he gained have led him toward responsibility. The conflict with the giant forced him to develop courage, strategy, and independence. In that sense, the giant's defeat marks Jack's shift from dependence to self-sufficiency. But the deeper development within the story is not just Jack's personal growth. It is the shift from one worldview to another. In older interpretations, the world above the clouds was a sacred space, and crossing into it was an act of spiritual or ritual significance. Over time, that meaning faded, and the story changed into a tale about cleverness, bravery, and justice. The original symbolic conflict between human curiosity and divine boundaries became a moral conflict between a boy and a monstrous oppressor. Jack's victory began to represent the triumph of ordinary people over unjust authority. Different retellings highlight different lessons. Some versions present Jack as a heroic rebel standing up against a powerful figure who hoards wealth. Others portray him as someone reclaiming his stolen inheritance. Still others frame the conflict as a test of intelligence versus brute strength. The variety of interpretations reflects how flexible the story became as societies changed. Each generation reshaped the conflict to match its own concerns. For example, during the early 19th century, when Victorian values shaped much of children's literature, Jack was portrayed as more responsible and noble. The conflict became less about trickery and more about rightful justice. But in other periods, especially during earlier folk traditions, Jack's bold and mischievous nature was more central. The conflict depended on his wits rather than on a claim to stolen property. In the 20th century, as mass media began retelling the story in films, animation, and school books, the conflict was simplified again. The giant was shown as fully evil, Jack as fully good, and the struggle became easier to understand. These later versions were designed for broad audiences, so the complexities found in older tellings were reduced. Yet each retelling still preserved the core conflict, a small human challenging a huge and powerful being. As the story continued to evolve, new creators experimented with different perspectives. Some modern interpretations attempt to sympathize with the giant or question Jack's actions. Others explore what the beanstalk might represent psychologically or socially. These reinterpretations show that the conflict remains powerful even when the details change. The idea of confronting something massive, intimidating, and unknown still captures the imagination. When people look at Jack and the Beanstalk today, they often see it as nothing more than an entertaining story about a boy and a giant. But beneath the surface, the tale holds several symbolic layers that help explain why it survived for so many centuries and why it appears in different forms across cultures. To appreciate its meaning, we need to look at the symbols inside the story and how they connect to broader ideas about power, ambition, social change, and the relationship between human beings and the unknown. One of the strongest symbols in the story is the beanstalk itself. It is not presented as a normal plant. It grows overnight, stretches beyond the clouds, and connects two worlds that are normally separate. In many old traditions, a vertical link between the earth and the sky symbolizes access to knowledge, spiritual power, or hidden realms. Even in cultures with no direct connection to European folklore, there are striking similarities. In Central Asian traditions, shamans were believed to climb spiritual trees or poles during rituals. In ancient Norse stories, a great tree connected the worlds of gods, humans, and other beings. In some West African tales, humans once lived closer to the sky until a link between the two worlds was broken. These examples help us understand why the beanstalk feels so powerful as a symbol. It represents a path to something greater, a doorway to a realm that people are normally not meant to enter. Jack's decision to climb it reflects curiosity, bravery, and sometimes even rebellion. He chooses to step into the unknown, which is a theme found in many hero stories. But in this tale, the path upward also suggests the lure of power that rests just beyond human reach. The giant, as a symbol, contributes to this idea. Giants in many cultural traditions are not simply big enemies. They often represent older, stronger forces that existed before the world became organized in a familiar way. In Greek stories, giants appear as early beings defeated by the Olympian gods. In Celtic stories, giants build landscapes or guard ancient treasures. In the Hebrew Bible, giants are sometimes described as powerful beings linked to earlier ages. Across cultures, giants often hold something valuable, whether it is land, knowledge, or sacred objects. In Jack and the Beanstalk, the giant controls wealth and magical treasures that are unreachable for ordinary people. This sets up a symbolic contrast between the powerless and the powerful. Jack, who begins the story in poverty, climbs into a world where wealth is concentrated in the hands of a single massive figure. The tension between them reflects a familiar social pattern. In many periods of history, people used stories to express their feelings about inequality, authority, and economic struggle. Jack's victory against the giant can be interpreted as a symbolic triumph of the powerless over the dominant. The three treasures Jack brings down from the sky also carry symbolic meaning. The gold represents survival and security. The hen that lays golden eggs stands for steady abundance rather than quick riches, and the magical harp symbolizes creativity, harmony, and possibly even spiritual insight. These objects echo symbols found in older traditions, where magical items often represent gifts from the gods or signs of divine favor. The fact that Jack brings these treasures into the human world suggests the idea of transforming society through knowledge and resourcefulness rather than through brute force. Another meaningful aspect of the story is the way it portrays transformation. Jack begins as a figure with almost no control over his life. By the end, he makes decisions that determine his future. This transformation reflects a pattern common in stories passed down through oral traditions. Listeners, especially young people, used tales like this to imagine change, progress, or a shift in identity. A climb upward often symbolized growth, achievement, or reaching a new stage of life. Some scholars view Jack's journey as a symbolic passage from childhood into adulthood. The dangerous climb, the risky encounters, and the final act of cutting down the beanstalk all involve decisions that require courage and responsibility. The end of the story shows Jack using the treasures to support his mother and improve their life. This shift toward responsibility mirrors the structure of many coming-of-age narratives, where the hero must return home with something meaningful that benefits the community. The tale also carries meanings related to curiosity and the pursuit of forbidden knowledge. In many old myths, crossing into a realm controlled by gods or supernatural beings is considered dangerous or even taboo. Yet Jack does so repeatedly. His actions challenge the idea that certain kinds of knowledge or power should remain out of reach. Instead, the story suggests that ambition, cleverness, and bravery can break down barriers between ordinary life and extraordinary opportunity. This connects to a long tradition of stories where heroes steal fire, wisdom, or magical items from powerful beings. In Greek mythology, Prometheus steals fire from the gods to help humanity. In some indigenous North American stories, the trickster figure steals the sun, moon, or stars to bring light to the world. These acts are risky and often punished, yet they represent the belief that progress sometimes requires reaching into forbidden places. Jack's theft of the giant's treasures fits into this pattern, though the story simplifies the consequences in later retellings. At the same time, the story reflects ideas about the dangers of disrupting natural order. When Jack cuts down the beanstalk and the giant falls to his death, the connection between the two worlds is destroyed. This ending signals a return to normal life, but also suggests that crossing boundaries has limits. Stories like this often highlight a balance between ambition and caution. The beanstalk offers opportunity, but it must eventually be removed to restore stability. This reflects an important theme found in many traditional tales: the idea that extraordinary experiences must come to an end so normal life can continue. The symbolism within Jack and the Beanstalk also influenced storytelling traditions in later centuries. Writers in the 19th century saw the story as a moral lesson about bravery and honesty. In that era, children's literature often aimed to teach obedience and good behavior, so Jack's actions were softened to present him as a hero rather than a trickster. This changed the meaning of the story by emphasizing justice and fairness over cunning and risk-taking. In the 20th century, as films, animated adaptations, and schoolbooks retold the story, the symbolism became simpler. The giant turned into a clear villain, the beanstalk became a straightforward magical object, and Jack was presented as a clean-cut hero. These versions helped the story spread widely across the world, but they also reduced some of the deeper themes. Still, even in simplified forms, the tale kept its core symbols of vertical ascent, unequal power, and daring ambition. Cross-cultural comparisons show that the themes in Jack and the Beanstalk are not unique. Stories about climbing upward, confronting giants, or stealing treasure appear in Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Americas. This widespread pattern suggests that certain symbolic ideas are shared across human cultures. People everywhere imagined the sky as a realm of mystery and power, and they created tales about reaching into that realm to retrieve something important. These stories helped explain natural forces, express social concerns, or teach lessons about courage and limitation. One meaningful comparison comes from some Native American traditions, where young heroes climb trees or ropes into the sky to rescue siblings, retrieve stolen items, or face sky beings. Another comes from Polynesian stories, in which demigods climb to heavenly realms to secure gifts for humanity. These examples do not imply that all these tales come from one original source, but they do show how the same symbolic structure appears in many places: an ascent, a confrontation, and a return with something valuable. The impact of Jack and the Beanstalk extends beyond folklore studies. Its themes show up in modern discussions about inequality, social mobility, and economic justice. The contrast between Jack's poverty and the giant's wealth mirrors real-world concerns about who controls resources and who has access to opportunity. The story has been interpreted as a metaphor for rising above one's circumstances, challenging authority, or claiming a better future through bold choices. Whether or not these interpretations match the original intent, they demonstrate how flexible and influential the tale has become. In modern psychology, the story has been used to discuss topics such as risk-taking behavior, childhood development, and the role of imagination in problem-solving. Jack's willingness to climb into the unknown is sometimes used as an example of how individuals confront fear and uncertainty. The giant, with his overwhelming power, can represent external obstacles such as social pressure, economic struggle, or emotional challenges. The tale's cultural impact also appears in language. Phrases like beanstalk growth or climbing the beanstalk sometimes describe rapid progress or movement toward opportunity. The story remains widely recognized, making it a convenient reference in education, business, and media. As we examine these layers of meaning, it becomes clear that Jack and the Beanstalk endures not because of its surface-level plot, but because of the themes that sit beneath it. The climb into the sky symbolizes ambition. The conflict with the giant reflects struggles against power. The treasures represent possibility, and the return home signifies transformation. These ideas are timeless, which is why the story continues to resonate across generations. In the end, Jack and the Beanstalk is more than a tale about magic beans and a fearsome giant. It is a story that reflects human curiosity, the desire for change, and the tension between the world as it is and the world as it could be. It has shifted through centuries, adapting to the needs of each generation while holding on to a symbolic framework that feels deeply human. The lasting impact of this story reminds us that even the simplest tales can carry complex meanings. They guide us, warn us, and help us understand ourselves. And once we look beneath the surface, we begin to see how much thought, history, and symbolism can be hidden inside a story that many people assume is only for children.